You are going to die, and when you do, where you end up depends entirely on where you grew up. Not in a religious sense, not in a moral sense, in a geographical one. For the ancient Greeks, the underworld was a cold, gray, joyless place. A vast shadowland ruled by a god who didn't want to be there either. No fire, no demons, just dust and silence and forgetting. For the ancient Egyptians, it was completely different. The Jewett was a labyrinth, a dangerous, winding passage filled with monsters, gates, and riddles. To survive it, you needed a map, and they literally buried one with you, the Book of the Dead. For the Norse, the underworld was frozen. Helheim sat at the bottom of the world tree, in a place so cold that the rivers flowing there were made of venom. The goddess who ruled it, also named Hel, was half beautiful, half corpse. For the Mesopotamians, the underworld was a dark house, not a metaphor. They called it the house of dust or the land of no return. Everyone went there. Good or evil, king or slave, no judgment, just endless, dusty, cramped existence, eating clay, wearing feathers instead of clothes. Why would civilizations that never spoke to each other imagine such radically different versions of the same destination? The answer is not theological, it is environmental. And once you see it, you will never look at any afterlife myth the same way again. The Romanian-born historian of religion Mircea Eliade spent decades studying sacred spaces across cultures. In his landmark 1957 work The Sacred and the Profane, he argued that every civilization projects its landscape onto the divine. What is above reflects what is below. The heavens look like the best version of where you live, and the underworld looks like the worst. This is not a metaphor. It is a pattern you can trace across thousands of years and every inhabited continent. Start with climate. The Norse lived in Scandinavia. Harsh winters, frozen seas, months of darkness, so their underworld was not burning, it was freezing. Helheim was cold because cold was what could kill you. Cold was the enemy they knew. Cold was the absence of life. The Greeks lived in the Mediterranean. Mild winters, gray, overcast days when the sun seemed to disappear, so Hades was not dramatic, it was dull, flat. A place where nothing grew and nothing changed. It was winter without spring. The Mesopotamians lived between two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, in what is now modern Iraq. Dust storms were a constant threat. The air was dry, the earth cracked, so their underworld was dust. It was the ground beneath them, extended forever. Now look at places where the earth itself was the danger. In Mesoamerica, the K'ich, Maya imagined Xibalba, the underworld, as a place of rivers filled with scorpions, blood, and pus. Houses of disease, darkness, cold, and jaguars. Why? Because the tropical lowlands of Guatemala were filled with venomous creatures, flooding rivers, and dense jungle where jaguars hunted at night. The underworld was the jungle, turned inward and made eternal. The Aztecs imagined Mictlan, their underworld, as a 9-layer journey through a landscape of obsidian winds and blood. Obsidian was volcanic glass. The Valley of Mexico was surrounded by volcanoes. They had watched eruptions. They had buried their dead in caves. The underworld was the volcano's interior. See the pattern? The underworld always mirrors what is beneath your feet and what threatens your life. Now go deeper, because climate alone does not explain everything. The Egyptians did something no other civilization did. They turned the underworld into a test. The Jewett was not just a destination. It was an obstacle course. You had to answer riddles, recite spells, navigate past crocodile-headed guardians and fiery serpents. Your heart was weighed against a feather on a golden scale. If your heart was heavier than the feather, heavy with sin, with guilt, with dishonesty, it was fed to a beast called Ammit. Part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus, and you ceased to exist. Why did the Egyptians build this elaborate system? Because Egypt was a civilization of order. The Nile flooded on a predictable schedule. The pharaoh maintained Ma'at, cosmic balance. The entire society was structured around the idea that chaos must be controlled. So even death was not allowed to be chaotic. The underworld had rules, it had bureaucracy, it had a court. Jan Assmann, one of the leading Egyptologists of the 20th century, spent his career studying exactly this. His 1990 work Death and Salvation in Ancient Egypt showed that the Egyptian afterlife was not just spiritual, it was political. The rituals of death mirrored the rituals of life. To enter the afterlife successfully was to prove you had lived correctly, according to the social and moral order of Egyptian society. The underworld in Egypt was a mirror of the state. Now compare that to ancient China. The Chinese underworld, Diyu, was modeled on the Chinese imperial bureaucracy. It had 10 courts. Each court was presided over by a judge. You were tried for your sins. Punishments were specific and vivid, being ground in a mortar, being sawed in half, being frozen in ice. But here is the key: you could leave. The Chinese underworld was not permanent. After you served your sentence, you were reincarnated, sent back to the world of the living. This reflects a fundamentally different relationship with death. Death was not a destination. It was a process, a cycle, like the seasons, like the rice harvest. You went in, you were processed, you came out. Karl Kerényi, the Hungarian scholar who collaborated with Carl Jung on studies of mythological archetypes, argued in the 1940s and 1950s that the structure of any underworld reveals what a culture cannot accept about death itself. The Greeks could not accept meaninglessness, so their underworld was a place where meaning was stripped away. You forgot who you were. You drank from the river Lethe, the river of forgetting, and your identity dissolved. The Egyptians could not accept disorder, so their underworld was a courtroom. The Chinese could not accept permanence, so their underworld was temporary. The Norse could not accept that the world would survive, so even their underworld was tied to Ragnarok, the final destruction. The dead in Helheim were not just waiting, they were marching. They would rise again at the end of everything. But not every culture painted the underworld as punishment or gloom. In Hindu mythology, Naraka, the underworld, had multiple layers. Some were places of punishment. Others were simply the realm of Yama, the god of death, where souls waited for judgment and eventual reincarnation. But above and below these layers existed realms of extraordinary beauty. The Hindu underworld was not a dead end. It was a waiting room between lives. This made sense for a civilization rooted in cycles: the monsoon, the harvest, the yuga, the endless turning wheel of existence. And the Egyptians themselves believed that beyond the judgment, beyond the trial, beyond the scales, there existed the field of reeds, Aru, a perfect mirror of Egypt. The same rivers, the same crops, the same sunlight, but without suffering, without hunger, without death. The underworld at its deepest level was home. The Aztec paradise, the one reserved for warriors who died in battle and women who died in childbirth, was called the House of the Sun. It was warm, bright, full of music. The dead became birds, they flew through the sky forever. Why warriors and mothers? Because both gave their lives in the act of creation. The warrior sustained the sun. The mother sustained the people. The paradise was not random, it was a reflection of what the culture valued most. And here is something that will change how you think about all of this. You live in a culture with an underworld too. You just don't call it that. Think about how your culture handles death. Where do the dead go? Not spiritually, physically. They go to hospitals, they go to funeral homes, they go to crematoriums or cemeteries. These are real places with real architecture, real rituals, and real rules, and they are different in every country. In the United States, death is sanitized. The body is embalmed, preserved. The funeral home looks like a living room with soft lighting and carpet. The dead person is made to look like they are sleeping. The message is, death is not really happening. In parts of West Africa, death is communal. Funerals last days. There is dancing. There is music. The dead are celebrated. The boundary between living and dead is not a wall, it is a curtain. In Japan, the Buddhist tradition of Aben imagines that the spirits of the dead return every summer. Lanterns are lit to guide them home. Food is prepared. The underworld is not far away. It is next door. Each of these is a modern underworld. Each is shaped by the same forces that shaped Xibalba, Hades, Jewett, and Hell. Geography, climate, social structure, the things you fear, the things you value. The American historian Thomas Laqueur, in his 2015 work The Work of the Dead, spent over 600 pages tracing how cultures across millennia have treated their dead. His conclusion was simple and devastating. The living need the dead to be somewhere, not because of physics. Because of meaning, we cannot accept that they simply stop. So we build places for them, we always have. That is the real answer to why every underworld is different. It is not that the afterlife changes. It is that every civilization, every single one, looked into the same darkness and painted it with the only colors they had. The cold civilizations painted it with ice. The river civilizations painted it with dust. The jungle civilizations painted it with snakes. The empire civilizations painted it with law. You would do the same, you already do. The next time you hear someone describe what happens after death, whether it is heaven, hell, reincarnation, nothing, or something else, ask yourself one question. What landscape are they standing on? Because the underworld is never just about death. It is about where you are standing when you imagine it.